Hello and welcome to the Liberal Arts Showcase. Today we're visiting with Jack Damico, professor and eminent scholar in communicative disorders. Welcome to the program, Jack.
Thanks, Jordan.
Jack, can you tell us a little bit about your research? I understand that you do research in human language, but what exactly do you do?
Yeah, I'm a linguist by training, but I worked as a speech-language pathologist with a master's degree for a number of years. And because of that, I became interested in language and communication as a social action, particularly with populations that have disabilities. And so a lot of my research has been focused on language and language disorders and literacy disorders in children, and then communication and language processing in adults with aphasia, that is a problem due to strokes. I've worked in some other fields, but those are the two areas that I've primarily worked in.
Okay. What initially excited you about that field and that area of inquiry?
Well, it's kind of interesting. When I was a undergraduate, I was a zoology major and very interested in science, and I was really concerned about preparing myself so I actually could teach at a university level. That's something, for some reason, I always wanted to do. Sometimes I'm not sure why I have that interest. But my advisor at the time suggested that I look at another area, because at the time, this was in the early to mid 70s, there weren't a lot of jobs in biology and zoology at the university level. And so what I did is I looked around, and I was interested in philosophy, and I was interested in science, and the field of communicative disorders seemed to have both of those. And so I decided that I would do my graduate work in that area. I worked as a speech-language pathologist in the Albuquerque public schools, and then realized that if I really want to make a difference and learn more myself, I would need to study in the area of linguistics and neurophysiology. And so those were the two areas I studied as a doctoral student, and started teaching at LSU and then came over to UL.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about the field? You mentioned aphasia and other speech disorders. What are those, and is the field evolving and changing?
Yeah, the field actually is only about 70 years old, but it's a really exciting field, because I remember being a graduate student and thinking, gosh, if I were around in the 30s or 40s when the field first started, that there'd be so many opportunities to learn things and to do research. Turns out there's probably more now than there was at that particular time. As a discipline, it's really exciting because we're dealing with language either at adult level or an undergraduate level, and other speech kinds of areas. And those are really important aspects for socialization and for the way people fit into society. So that's great. As a profession, it's great because probably for the last 20 years, speech-language pathology has been in the top 10 by the U.S. Department of Labor for the most needed professionals coming in to get jobs. It's exciting because people can work in multiple areas: hospitals, schools, private practice clinics, universities. They can do research, they can do clinical work. And so it's really an area that I found to be very exciting. Even though I did my doctoral degree in another area, I always looked at it as an opportunity to come back to speech-language pathology, and that's what I've done.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about some of the speech disorders that you study, and how we treat those and how that might have changed.
Okay. Back in the 1970s, when I was starting to work in this particular field, we really were oriented to working with kids with language problems and learning problems and articulation speech problems, kids who have unintelligibility or misarticulations when they talk. And other areas with smaller incidents like stuttering and cleft palate and some other areas, still valid and important areas, but I was drawn to the language and the speech kinds of areas. Since that time, there have been a lot of things that have changed about the field. We've learned a lot more about the genetics of communication disorders. We've learned a lot about using different kinds of approaches to teaching and doing intervention, primarily from a more constructivist perspective than a behaviorist perspective. It just changes the way you focus on things. Rather than focus on the speech behaviors, you focus on the internal strategies that people use to create the speech and the language behaviors. Because of that, what I have done in the area is worked with adults, teaching them strategies to overcome problems, and also kids, teaching them strategies. I also became interested in literacy because literacy is so important in school, and the basis of literacy is your language ability. So it's a field with lots of different diversity in terms of the people you work with, the disorders you can work with. So,
can you tell us a little bit about the Language and Literacy Project?
Yeah, a number of years ago, let me see, that would have been 2002, my wife and colleague, Holly Damico, at the time, we decided that what we need to do was really do some more work with language and literacy. And so what we did is we established a project in the summertime. The project, as we designed it, was going to have 4 components. Number one, we were going to work with kids with language and literacy problems. So many children no longer believe that they can be an effective reader or writer because of the experiences they had in school when they had difficulties. So we wanted to work with them. Number two, we wanted to teach our graduate students the best and most innovative ways to work with language and literacy in a particular situation. Third, because we had just started a doctoral program, I wanted to have the doctoral students have an opportunity to learn to supervise other students so they could watch us supervising the students. And also we wanted to make it a clinical research laboratory. And so that's what we did. That project has been going on now for 16 years. We have about 30 kids in the summertime in the project, 4 days a week, 3 hours a day. Now we have 3 or 4 clinical supervisors working with about 15 of our graduate students and about 30 children. The program has received national recognition from the American Speech Language and Hearing Association. We got a couple of awards several years ago for best clinical practices. In 2011, we decided to do the same kind of thing with aphasia and communication. So now we have an aphasia project also in the summertime that allows us to develop different ways of working with aphasics in conversation, because even though we can work with them on processing language, the real importance where the rubber really hits the road is when they're out and they want to talk to people. And so conversation is what we're working on. And so we've developed some strategies that also recently have been published and gotten some really good opportunities. We have the same 4 objectives, I guess you would say, in aphasia. It's just a different population and looking at a difference.
Remind me of what aphasia is.
Aphasia is a language problem or a language processing problem when people have strokes. And so what it does is, because of a vascular problem in the brain, what they do is they can't process language as well, and so it interferes with their communication. There are a bunch of different kinds of aphasia, but basically it comes down to they're no longer able to function in society effectively.
And I understand that the department has a clinic that you've been talking about, some of the research and ways it's integrated students into the program, but it's also a clinic that serves the public?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, to be a clinical speech-language pathologist, you have to have about 350 direct clinical contact hours with children or adults with disabilities. That is sort of your practicum. And you have to be supervised. I think it's a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio for a clinical supervisor with those particular students. Our language and literacy learning clinic has, gosh, about 150, 160 clients during the year. And from 8 o'clock in the morning to 5:30 in the afternoon, we've got an active clinic going. Our students, both undergraduates and graduate students, take courses throughout the day, but then every one of them, certainly the graduate students, every day also have clinical contact hours with children or adults that are in need of services.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's a nonprofit organization.
It is, and in fact, we have just voted to no longer even charge fees for our clinical services. One of the reasons for that is we have a great number of really good speech-language pathologists across the community, and they're in hospitals, and they're in schools, and they're in private practice. We, as a state-supported university, didn't want to compete with people we're training. And so we like to, especially in aphasia, for instance, with adults, we like to have an opportunity to work with those people once their insurance has run out, once their other opportunities have changed. And so we work closely with the clinicians around the community, but we also make sure that those clients get the services they need.
And is that part of the aphasia intervention project, or is that a separate
It is.
project?
It is. Both projects, the language and literacy and the aphasia intervention project, are primarily summer projects. They're both intensive in that they're 3 or 4 hours a day. For the aphasia, it's 3 days a week. For the children, it's 4 days a week. One of them we run at the International Students Building. That's the literacy project, because there are too many of them. And the aphasia project we run out of our actual clinic.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all wonderful to hear about. We are here today with Jack Damico, Professor of Communicative Disorders. Join us in a few minutes when we come back. Welcome back to the Liberal Arts Showcase. We're talking today to Jack Damico, Professor and Endowed Chair in the Communicative Disorders Department at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Welcome back, Jack.
Thanks.
So Jack, I see you've brought a number of books, of publications that you've been involved with today. Can you tell us a little bit about them, a little bit about research in the field and how it gets published?
Oh, sure. Yeah, these are some of the books that I've either co-edited and some things that I've written and with colleagues. Because I came from the area of linguistics and in communication disorders, some of these books are dealing with diversity issues, bilingualism, those kinds of things. Some of them are dealing with aphasia, some are dealing with language disorders in children. So I'm sort of, I have a smattering of interest in the books I think try to show that kind of diversity.
It's a very impressive stack.
Well, you know, that's what we do as academics, isn't it? We do our research and publish our articles, but it's good to be able to put everything in sort of one succinct kind of place, and that's what these books have tried to do. They're primarily, with one exception, they're primarily clinically oriented books for practicing clinicians and clinical linguists.
Right. So would you say that they have, the research in these publications has altered practices in the field out there?
Yeah, I think so. I'm really proud with the kinds of things that we're doing in the department, because there are a number of people in the department that are really sort of at the cutting edge of the field in their particular areas. We've certainly done a lot with the work that I've done with colleagues like Karen Lynch and Jennifer Tetnowski, and some of the doctoral students. We've done a lot in aphasia. We've actually, as I said before, published some work on some of the first real conversational interventions that have occurred in aphasia. So we're really happy about that. We're doing a lot of work right now with Ryan Nelson in the department on eye tracking and reading, and looking at oral reading versus silent reading in aphasia to see which one helps people. And we're finding that despite what the field has always believed, we're seeing something completely different, and it's making a difference in the therapy that we're doing. So that's important. And certainly in literacy and in language testing, we've done a lot of work through this department that's made a difference.
What is that conclusion that you came to, that between oral and silent reading?
Well, traditionally people have always said, you know, if I read aloud while I'm reading, the people with aphasia said, I'm able to do it much better. I understand more. I'm able to focus on it. But we're finding that's not the case at all. We're putting eye tracking equipment on them so we can see what their eyes are doing, because that eye tracking allows, it's sort of like a visual recorder. It allows you to see how the brain is using the eyes to construct meaning while reading. And we're finding that that's not at all the case, that if they read silently, they read and comprehend much better. And so what we're doing is not only working with them on oral reading, but we're giving them assignments at home, not orally, but silently, and it's making a big difference.
So that really shows that the research has the power to improve people's lives.
That's right.
Tremendously.
Last year, Karen Lynch and I presented at a conference in London on aphasia, clinical aphasia, and that was really one of the plenary sessions of that particular conference. So it got a lot of attention in Europe as a result.
So in addition to your own research career, you are now also serving as Assistant Vice President for Research for the university. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah, I tell people that I work 70% in the research office and 70% in communication disorders, and it seems that's probably not enough, but I'm really fortunate to have been able to go over and work in the research office. I've been working as a professor since 1985, or an instructor professor. And you know, every once in a while you get a little stale on things. And so I was looking for another challenge, and the vice president there asked me to consider coming over full time. And I didn't really want to leave my own research, my own department, and certainly not my doctoral students. And so I agreed to go over half-time. And it's been really wonderful for me, because even though we're really interested in our research over in communication disorders and in liberal arts scholarship and research, I didn't know what other people were doing across campus. Now, because of that office, I'm across campus looking what a lot of other people are doing, and it's very exciting.
Would you say that the research agenda and level at the university has changed in recent years?
There's a dramatic change since 1991, when I first came over as the Doris B. Hawthorne Scholar. It was a good university then, and it was really a good teaching university, and there were pockets of excellence, I believe. But I think we're seeing that across the university now. I think that just this year, for the first time, we passed the $100 million mark in research and development expenditures that we reported to the National Science Foundation. Now, what really separates the top tier research universities, there are about 70 of them in the country, and there are 3,600 universities and colleges in the United States. So the top 70, what separates them from the next 110, the group we're in, is that $100 million mark. And so we're really excited about that. I'd like to say it was the research office that really did a lot of that, but it's not. It's the scholars, it's the researchers on the campus that have done that.
What does the research office do?
Dr. Cullerew, the vice president, is fond of saying what we try to do is take away the barriers for the researchers on campus and the scholars to actually get their research done. We try to do that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We're also trying to help break down silos across academic departments so that people can do more collaboration, greater collaboration. As you know, we started something called the Communities of Interest several years ago, and we've had 5 of them, where we bring researchers who are interested in various topics together once a semester, and they share information in 5-minute Ignite talks, and then people talk about possibilities of collaboration during a social hour. That has been very successful. We've enjoyed doing that very much. So what we're always trying to do is find different ways of assisting the university's faculty to increase their research, to more easily do the research.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the external funding? How does that work? How do we get to $100 million?
Well, several years ago, we were at 67 million, which is really pretty good. Now, the 67 and 100, that's not just extramural research, it's also what the university invests in research too, so right. it's a combination.
Okay.
But we were at 67 a couple of years ago. Vice President Cullerew said, let's put as an aspirational goal 100 million by 2020. We reached it 3 years early. One of the reasons for that is because we have a number of active research centers across campus. And those research centers, some of those people are actually in the academic departments and some of them aren't. And then we have the research through the academic colleges. Our biggest producer really is the New Iberia Research Center with Dr. Francois Villinger, who came here and made a profound difference in sponsored research for us. Primarily where we've made the big changes over these several years is in extramural funding. We are funded by the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, and on and on and on. Now this is at a time when the university is getting less funding from the state, as we all know, and also the feds are getting less funding for research, and so it speaks well of our academic
We're getting a bigger
staff
piece
and faculty.
of a smaller pie.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's fantastic. So you are known for teaching PhD students. You've advised many doctoral dissertations.
Right.
How has that been? How is it different from undergraduate teaching?
Well, it is quite different. I really haven't taught undergraduates in a long time other than guest lecturing. And I used to like teaching undergraduates, particularly juniors and up, because they were really excited in a way that you don't always see with other people. They're excited to learn new things. When students become graduate students, they're a little more sophisticated and
serious.
And serious, that's right. The great thing about the doctoral program and working with doctoral students is it allows me to really get into the theory and the ideology and then say, okay, now what are the principles that fall through that allow us to deal with things in practice? And it allows us to argue points and have to defend those things. And so it's really much more intellectually engaging with doctoral students than it is with undergraduates.
And what are some of the things that our PhD graduates have gone on to do?
We've been very successful. We've had a very successful doctoral program. I think we started it in 2001 or 2, if I'm not mistaken.
2001.
And we've had about, I don't know, 45 or so people. We've got them teaching at universities all over the United States and frankly all over the world. New Zealand, several people teaching in the United Kingdom. I've got a student that just accepted a job in Istanbul. We've got 2 African students from Ghana who their government sent over to get their PhDs, and they're going to go back and create the field of speech-language pathology in the country of Ghana. That's very exciting. We've got a couple of students that are going to do the same kind of thing in China. And so one of the interesting things about this field is any of our students who didn't want to necessarily stay in this area, because we don't really hire our own people necessarily, they have been able to get a job working at a university if that's what they wanted, 100% of those people.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Okay. Amazing achievements. Jack Damico, it's been wonderful talking to you today. Professor and endowed chair in the Communicative Disorders Department. Thank you and join us next time.